Close your eyes, dear listener. Let the noise of the day melt away. Allow each breath to slow like a soft breeze drifting through ancient ruins. Tonight, we set sail to Zeus, a journey through myth and history.
High above the land of mortal men, where mountains pierced the heavens and clouds draped their shoulders like silver robes, there stood Olympus. Silent to human ears, the mountain breathed with an ancient pulse, the heartbeat of a god's dominion. At its summit, beyond the reach of ordinary storms, the palace of the immortals gleamed, white marble kissed by the last rays of a dying sun. And there, upon the highest peak, the storm waited.
The people below had many names for him. In the markets of Athens, philosophers whispered of him as Zeus Pater, the father of gods and men. In the quiet valleys of Thessaly, shepherds prayed to Zeus Ombrios, the bringer of rain. In Sparta, where spears clashed and warriors bled, they cried to Zeus Lacedaemonios, the war-favored king. But to himself, Zeus had no name. For what need has the storm for words?
The sky rumbled as he stirred, golden lightning dancing along his fingertips, brief sparks that lit the marble floor of his great hall. The winds bent in reverence, whispering his many titles, Thunderer, Sky-Father, Lord of the Ages. But their songs fell silent when his gaze turned toward the horizon.
The world had changed. Empires had risen, temples carved and consecrated in his honor. His name had been etched into the stones of Delphi and chanted in the sanctuaries of Dodona. Yet even gods are not immune to the turning wheel of time. The mortals had begun to question.
Far below, in a quiet grove, a young man with ink-stained hands would write of atoms and logic, daring to explain the world without the will of Olympus. Across the seas, others whispered of one God instead of many, of unseen powers and mortal salvation. The offerings at the altars had grown fewer. The sacred fires did not burn as they once had. And yet the storm still waited. From the high balcony of Olympus, Zeus looked down upon the world, upon the lands that had sung his praises for 1,000 years. He saw the sprawl of cities, Corinth with its gleaming temples, Athens with its theaters of marble and thought, and Crete, where his story had begun in secrecy and shadow. Memory, ageless and sharp, returned to him like the scent of rain before lightning.
In the beginning, before the throne and the crown, there was only the child. A boy hidden in a cave, cradled in the arms of nymphs, fed on the milk of the goat Amalthea, while his father devoured the rest of his children in fear. The cave had been cold and dark, but even then, the sky above had called to him. The Curettes, young warriors armored in bronze, had danced and clashed their spears in wild rhythm, drowning out his cries so that Kronos would never find him. Every night the wind whispered of prophecy, of chains waiting to be broken, of a war yet to come. Even then, the storm had been in his veins. Back in the present, thunder rolled across Olympus as Zeus turned his gaze away from the mortal lands and toward the shadowed corridors of his palace. Pillars soared upward, their carved edges gilded by the soft flicker of celestial fire. The air smelled of cedar and ozone, the scent of storm clouds brewing in the high mountain air. There, within the great hall, the other gods lingered.
Hera, his queen, sat upon a throne of ivory and gold, her eyes sharp as a hawk's, watching every movement with the patience of eternity. Athena, wise and unflinching, leaned against her spear, her gaze fixed not on Olympus, but upon the cities below, where men fought their wars of ambition and pride. Apollo strummed his lyre in quiet thought, the notes weaving threads of prophecy that none but he could hear. They felt it too, the shifting of the world, the whisper that even the deathless could not silence.
Zeus spoke, and when he did, the hall quieted. "The world changes," he said, his voice the low rumble of distant thunder. "But storms do not fade, they only wait." The words hung heavy in the air, as if the marble itself had absorbed their weight. He turned, stepping into the balcony once more, and the night broke open with light, a spear of lightning arcing from the heavens to the distant sea, its echo shaking the bones of the mountain. No matter how far the mortals drifted, no matter what new gods they carved or crowned, they could never truly escape the storm. It was in their blood, in their stories, in the way their hearts raced at the crash of thunder. Zeus knew this. He had seen it countless times, in countless ages. Civilizations rose like the tide, reached for the heavens, and then, as all things mortal must, they fell. And when they fell, they whispered prayers to the sky. And he, eternal, unchanging, answered.
From the shadowed edge of the mountain, an eagle cried, its wings cutting the moonlit sky. Zeus raised his hand, and lightning coiled around his fingers like a serpent at rest. "Come," he said softly, though to whom even he could not say. The eagle descended, talons gripping the marble rail of the balcony. Its eyes, sharp, golden, almost human, regarded him in silence. The bird had seen empires crumble, temples burn, and yet it remained as ageless as the one it served. For a moment, Zeus closed his eyes. The air was still, heavy with the scent of rain and distant pine. And in that stillness, the memories came. The war against the Titans, the endless struggles to hold dominion over sky and earth, the loves that burned bright and brief, leaving behind children who would shape the mortal world. Heroes, monsters, wars that shook the bones of the earth, and through it all, the unrelenting weight of the crown.
The storm broke at last, lightning tearing the heavens open, thunder shaking the bones of the mountain. Below, the mortal world shuddered in awe and fear. Farmers in the fields dropped to their knees, whispering hurried prayers. Sailors at sea crossed their hearts, begging for safe passage. Kings in their palaces clutched at their swords, uncertain whether the omen boded war or mercy. And in the highest hall of Olympus, Zeus stood silent, the storm at his back, the weight of eternity in his gaze, because he knew. Stories were not just memories of what was. They were warnings, promises, and truths yet to unfold. And the story of Zeus, king, lover, judge, and storm, had only begun to be told.
Before Olympus, before the marble palaces and the crack of thunder across a boundless sky, there was chaos. It was not chaos as mortals imagined, not noise or disorder,
but a silence so deep it could swallow sound, a darkness so absolute that even the thought of light had not yet been born. From that stillness came Gaia, the earth, vast and unyielding, and with her Uranos, the endless dome of the sky, pressing low upon her body. They bore children, the first Titans, beings of impossible size and ancient power. Kronos, the youngest but most cunning of them all, watched the world form in silence, his sharp eyes gleaming like polished obsidian. And in time, Kronos betrayed his father. From the blood of Uranos, cast down by the sickle of his son, sprang the Erinyes, the giants, and the first shadows of vengeance. The throne passed from sky to Titan, and with it came an age of uneasy rule, a reign built not on wisdom or love, but on fear. Kronos had heard the prophecy whispered in the stillness. One of your children will rise against you, and your reign will end. And so, when his children were born, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, Kronos swallowed them whole.
Far below the shining surface of the world, in the deep places where the earth's bones groan and the roots of mountains drink molten fire, the swallowed children sat in darkness, their cries muffled by the endless hum of the Titan's belly. But Rhea, his queen, could no longer watch in silence. She had borne 5 children, and 5 times they had been taken. When she felt life stirring within her once more, the 6th child, the one who would be her last, she made her plan. The cave on Crete was hidden from the eyes of gods and Titans alike. Its entrance lay behind a waterfall, its roar masking the cries of the newborn. Inside, the air smelled of moss and wet stone, cool and sharp, and the only light came from a thin shaft of sun piercing through a crack in the ceiling. There, on a bed of woven rushes, Zeus was born. His first breath was sharp, his cry ringing through the cavern like a spark in dry tinder. Outside, the Curetes, young warriors clad in bronze, their faces hidden behind masks of hammered gold, clashed their shields and spears in wild rhythm, their dance drowning out the sound that might carry to the ears of Kronos. The nymph Amalthea came first, offering her milk to the hungry infant. She was gentle, her hair the color of honey, her smile quiet but fierce. The child drank greedily, and as he did, the cave trembled. Lightning flickered at the edges of his tiny hands, not yet tamed, but brimming with promise. Zeus grew quickly. By the first turning of the moon, his gaze was sharp and unblinking. By the first harvest, his legs carried him to the edges of the cave, where he would watch the waterfall's endless descent with quiet fascination. The nymphs whispered among themselves, uneasy but proud, for the boy was not like other children. When storms rolled across Crete, shaking the mountains and splitting trees with their fury, the child laughed. He would reach his hands toward the sky, as if trying to grasp the lightning that danced beyond the clouds. But prophecies do not sleep. Word reached Kronos that his queen had borne another child, though no whisper of where or when. Rage like molten stone burned through him. He sent his spies across the earth, his hunters into the deepest caverns, his gaze sweeping across the oceans and skies. Yet the cave on Crete remained hidden, veiled by magic older than time. And so the boy grew. By the time he came of age, Zeus was tall and broad-shouldered.
his hair the color of storm clouds, his eyes sharp and bright as a summer sky before the first crack of thunder. His hands, though young, held strength enough to fell an oak. The curetes taught him the ways of war, the arc of the blade, the dance of shield and spear, while the nymphs taught him the quiet wisdom of the earth, the language of stones and streams. Amalthea, old now, but unbowed, gave him her final gift, the horn of plenty, broken from her own brow, said to pour forth whatever its bearer desired. He accepted it in silence, but his gaze turned often to the horizon, where the world stretched wide and waiting. One night, when the moon was a silver coin cast upon the sea, the cave filled with an unfamiliar presence. It was not the rustle of the nymphs or the sharp clatter of bronze from the curetes. It was older, colder, a weight in the air that pressed against his lungs. From the darkness a figure stepped forward, tall as a mountain, with hair black as the void before dawn and eyes that shimmered like molten gold. The figure regarded Zeus in silence. "Do you know me, child?" the figure asked, voice deep as the earth. Zeus hesitated, then shook his head. "I am Metis, wisdom itself, and I am here because the time of waiting is done."
From Metis, Zeus learned of the prophecy. He learned of his father's fear, of the siblings swallowed whole and trapped in the cavernous belly of the Titan. He learned that his birth had been the spark, but that the fire, the war to come, would be his to ignite. "You are the storm," Metis said, her hand resting briefly upon his brow. "But even a storm must know where to strike." That night Zeus stood at the edge of the cave, the waterfall roaring before him, and raised his hands to the sky. Lightning flared, brighter and sharper than ever before, splitting the night in a blinding arc. The mountain trembled, the sea churned, and far away, upon his throne of black marble, Kronos stirred, unease settling cold and heavy in his ancient bones. The boy he had sought to destroy had grown, and the world was about to change. The storm began quietly. Zeus left the cave on Crete at dawn, his feet carrying him over sharp stones and whispering grass. The nymphs wept quietly as they watched him go, though they knew the boy they had raised was no longer theirs to keep. The curetes clashed their shields one final time, their war song echoing against the cliffs, a promise that his name would never be forgotten. Above him, the sky opened, not with sunlight, but with lightning, threads of gold and white weaving through the morning clouds. He walked toward the horizon, every step guided by the rhythm of prophecy, every breath heavy with the weight of what was to come. Far away, in the black halls of Othrys, where Kronos ruled, the Titan King stirred. He had felt it for months now, the whisper of rebellion, the shifting of the earth beneath his feet. Dreams troubled his sleep, visions of storms rising, and a hand, his own blood, grasping at the sickle that had once carved him king. When word came that the boy had been found, grown strong and sharp as a blade, Kronos did not hesitate. He summoned his brothers, the elder Titans, heavy with power and pride, and ordered that the mountain be scoured, the boy dragged to him in chains. But destiny cannot be shackled.
Zeus did not come alone. From the depths of Tartarus, the Cyclops heard his call. Bound in chains, forged by the Titans themselves, they cried out to the young god,
recognizing in him the echo of freedom long denied. It was Metis, ever cunning, who guided Zeus to the pit where the great smiths labored in silence. With a stroke of his hand, the chains broke, and the Cyclopses rose from their prison, their one great eye glowing like molten silver in the darkness. In gratitude, they forged for him the weapon that would carry his name through eternity, the thunderbolt. A shard of pure storm, captured and bound, the lightning sang in his hand, wild and alive. For Hades, they forged the helm of invisibility, its shadow deep enough to swallow even light. For Poseidon, they shaped the trident, its 3 prongs sharp enough to split the sea. The war had begun. The first strike came at dusk. Zeus stood upon the ridge of Othrys, the mountain that crowned the Titan's dominion. The air trembled around him, heavy with the scent of rain and the electric taste of thunder. Below, the armies of the Titans waited, their banners snapping like the wings of great birds. Cronus stood at their center, black sickle in hand, his gaze sharp and cold. "You would raise your hand against your father," Cronus thundered, his voice shaking the stones. "You are not my father," Zeus said, his voice calm, sharp as a blade. "You are the shadow that devoured my blood. Today, that shadow ends." Lightning flared, and the mountain answered.
The battle raged for years, though time in that age did not move as it does now. The sky burned, storms roaring without end, and the earth split open, spilling rivers of fire that consumed forests and plains alike. Hades moved like a phantom, the helm's shadow cloaking his strikes. Poseidon shattered cliffs and churned the seas into mountains of water that crashed upon the Titan ranks. But the Titans were vast, their strength older than the bones of the earth. For every blow struck, for every surge of storm and sea, the enemy rose again, their fury boundless. The war dragged on, neither side yielding, until the cries of the Cyclopes rose once more from their forges deep in the earth. They brought new weapons, greater than before, and with them came the first taste of victory. It was in the 7th year that the turning came. On the slopes of Othrys, beneath a sky torn open by storm and flame, Zeus faced Kronos. The Titan moved first, his sickle flashing in the fractured light, but Zeus was faster. The thunderbolt roared, a spear of pure white fire that split the air and drove the Titan to his knees. With a cry that shook the mountains, Zeus struck again, once, twice, until the black crown of Othrys cracked and the storm swallowed the Titan whole. The world went still, and from the silence the swallowed gods emerged, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Poseidon, Hades, their forms weary but unbroken, their eyes burning with the light of freedom. The reign of the Titans was over. From the broken stones of Othrys, Zeus and his siblings built their throne. The sky, once heavy with the rule of Titans, cleared, revealing the bright blue dome of eternity. Upon the highest peak of Olympus they raised their palace of marble and gold, its halls gleaming in the sunlight, its columns wrapped in vines of living green. The realms were divided. To Zeus, the vast sky and the crack of thunder. To Poseidon, the endless sea and all its hidden depths. To Hades, the underworld, the silent land of shadow, where all mortals would one day walk. Peace followed, brief but golden. The earth healed, rivers ran clear again, and the songs of men rose once more to the heavens. But even then, as he stood upon his new throne, lightning coiled at his fingertips, Zeus knew the truth that few dared whisper. The war was over. The storm had only just begun.
The storm had quieted, but the world was not silent. Across the earth, the scars of the Titanomachy still lingered, valleys split open by the fury of lightning, mountains blackened where fire had roared, oceans reshaped by the churning of Poseidon's trident. The air was thick with the scent of ash and rain, but the sky above, for the first time in an age, was clear. And upon the highest peak, where even the eagles dared not fly, Olympus rose. The palace shimmered like a dream made solid. Columns of pure white marble spiraled toward the heavens, their bases wrapped in vines of gold that pulsed with living light. Waterfalls cascaded from the mountain's flanks, their spray glittering like diamonds in the morning sun. Within, the halls stretched endlessly, each chamber alive with the hum of eternity, the quiet, inexorable heartbeat of the gods themselves. Here Zeus took his throne. It was carved from the bones of the mountain, polished smooth by the Cyclopes, and inlaid with veins of gold and streaks of storm-forged crystal. From it, the king of Olympus looked down upon his new dominion, the sky unbroken above, the land sprawling far and wide below. The first council of the gods was held beneath that gleaming roof. Hera sat beside him, her dark eyes sharp, her presence as commanding as the queen she had always been, even in the shadows of Kronos. Athena, born of his own mind and storm, stood silent and watchful, her hand resting upon the haft of her spear. Apollo and Artemis lingered near the windows, their faces turned toward the horizon, the twin embodiments of light and wildness, already restless within the polished walls. Poseidon leaned against a column, his trident resting casually at his side, the scent of salt and tide clinging to his skin. Across from him, Hades lingered in the shadows, quiet as the grave, his gaze distant and unreadable. The war was done. The thrones were set. The world was theirs.
But rule is never quiet. For as the gods claimed Olympus, the earth itself shifted. From the depths of Tartarus, the last children of Gaia, the giants, stirred, their voices like the grinding of stone against stone. They rose in defiance, their colossal forms blotting out the horizon, their anger older than language. They did not forget the fall of the Titans, nor forgive the gods who now sat in their stead. And from the blackest pit came Typhon. Typhon was not merely a monster. He was chaos given form. Taller than mountains, his body wreathed in fire and shadow, his eyes burning like molten iron, and from his mouth poured a roar that split the air and shook the bones of the earth. The gods trembled. Even Poseidon, who could churn the seas into mountains of water with a flick of his trident, fell back before the storm of Typhon's approach. The winds howled, the skies tore open, and Olympus itself quaked as the beast ascended the mountain. But Zeus did not move. When the first blow came, it was like the breaking of the world. Typhon's claws tore through the peaks, his fire scorching the clouds.
The lesser gods fled, the cries carried on the wind. But Zeus stood his ground. He raised his hand, and the sky darkened. The air thickened with the taste of rain and ozone. Lightning danced along his arms, arcing from his fingertips in wild, writhing coils. When he spoke, it was not with words, but with thunder, his voice a sound older than the first dawn. Enough, the mountain answered. The battle that followed would be sung for ages. Typhon lashed out, his claws tearing at the heavens, but Zeus met him strike for strike. The first bolt tore through the storm, blinding and absolute, slamming into the beast's chest with the force of creation itself. The second split the sky, its echo shaking the very foundations of the world. The earth cracked open, rivers boiled, forests turned to ash, and still the two fought, neither yielding, neither faltering. But Zeus was the storm. With a final cry, he hurled the thunderbolt, brighter and hotter than the heart of the sun, and Typhon fell. The ground swallowed him, chains of unbreakable fire wrapping around his form, binding him deep within the bowels of Tartarus. The world stilled, and upon Olympus the gods looked to their king, not in fear, but in awe. With Typhon chained, the reign of Zeus was unchallenged. The giants fell one by one, their rebellion snuffed out like candles in a gale. Order settled upon the world, heavy but steady. And for a time, peace followed. The mortals, too, looked up at the sky and felt the change. They built temples of stone and marble, their columns rising like prayers made solid. They lit fires at the foot of mountains, cast wine upon the earth, and whispered his many names: Zeus Olympios, Zeus Xenios, Zeus Horkios, the king, the guardian of guests, the keeper of oaths. And from the heights of Olympus, the storm watched. But power is never quiet for long. As the seasons turned, as the river swelled, and the crops ripened, whispers began to stir in the halls of the immortals, for the storm that brought order could also bring chaos, and Zeus, king, judge, storm, was not a god easily contained.
Peace had returned to Olympus, but peace to Zeus was never stillness. The storm in his veins demanded movement, and with it came desire, wild and untamed. For though the sky was his, though the lightning bent to his will, his heart was restless, ever drawn to the mortal world below. The queen and the king. Hera had been his first and truest match, the goddess of the hearth, the protector of marriage, the eternal balance to his unbridled will. Their union was a spectacle even among the gods. Upon Olympus, the air bloomed with the fragrance of ambrosia. Rivers of nectar flowed from the mountain slopes, and the air itself shimmered with the hum of immortal song. Yet even as the vows were spoken, Hera's sharp gaze never left his. She knew him, the currents of his nature, the storms that would never quiet. She loved him, yes, but she did not trust the lightning that danced in his eyes. And she was right not to. Leto and the birth of the twins. Among the first of his mortal entanglements was Leto, the quiet daughter of the Titans. She was a goddess of twilight, her presence as soft and steady as the fading light of day. When Hera learned of their union, her fury was swift and unrelenting. She barred every land, every island, forbidding them to offer sanctuary to the expectant Leto. For months Leto wandered the earth, her steps light but weary, the sky itself weeping for her plight. Only when the island of Delos, a wandering rock adrift in the Aegean, took pity, did she find rest. There, beneath the shade of a lone olive tree, she gave birth to the twins, Apollo, the radiant god of light and music, and Artemis, the huntress whose arrows would sing through the forests. When the cries of the newborn gods echoed across the island, the earth trembled, and even Hera turned her gaze away, knowing that something greater had entered the world.
Europa and the Bull. Another tale, whispered in the coastal cities where fishermen cast their nets beneath the rising sun, spoke of Europa, the mortal princess of Phoenicia. She was gathering flowers by the sea when the white bull appeared, its coat gleaming like polished marble, its eyes deep and knowing. She laughed as it knelt before her, its great head lowered in an unspoken invitation. When she climbed upon its back, the bull surged forward, the surf breaking around them, the sea opening as they crossed the waters. It was only when the shores of Crete rose from the horizon that Europa understood. The bull was no beast, but the god himself. And from their union came Minos, the king who would shape the labyrinth and the legends that followed. But not every story of Zeus's desire ended in triumph. In Thebes there lived Semele, a mortal woman whose beauty caught the eye of the god. Their love burned fast and bright, but Hera's jealousy was a thing of quiet cruelty. Disguised as an old woman, Hera whispered poison into Semele's ear. "If he is truly the king of gods, make him prove it. Ask him to come to you in his full glory." Blinded by love, Semele did as she was told. And when Zeus, bound by oath, revealed himself, all lightning and endless fire, the sight consumed her, reducing her to ash. From her ashes, however, Zeus saved the child she carried. He sewed the boy into his thigh, carrying him until the time of his birth. Thus was born Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry, the eternal reminder that from ruin beauty can still rise.
Athena, the daughter of thought. Then there was Metis, the first and wisest of his consorts. She had counseled him in the war against the Titans, whispered strategies in the dark, guided his hand when the storm raged too wild. When she fell pregnant, a prophecy reached his ears that her child would surpass him, that his throne would tremble beneath its weight. Fear, sharp and unrelenting, took root. He swallowed her whole. Days turned to weeks, weeks to months, and then, one morning, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Zeus staggered, clutching his head, as pain unlike any storm tore through him. With a crack like the breaking of the world, his skull split open, and from it sprang Athena, full-grown and armed, her eyes alight with wisdom and fire. The halls of Olympus shook as the gods bore witness. She did not cry, did not stumble. She simply stood, her spear in hand, her gaze sharp and steady, the daughter not of love, but of thought and inevitability. The Rise of Heroes. From these unions, divine and mortal, came the heroes whose names would shape the ages. Perseus, who would ride upon winged Pegasus and strike down Medusa, her gaze frozen forever in death. Heracles, the strongest of them all, born of a mortal woman, his life a tapestry of trials, betrayals, and labors that would raise him to the stars. Helen, the face that would launch 1,000 ships, her beauty sparking the war that would draw even the gods into mortal bloodshed. Each was a thread in the endless weaving of fate, their triumphs and tragedies echoing the storm from which they had sprung. And through it all, Zeus watched, not as a father, not always, but as the storm, distant, unblinking, shaping the world below without ever fully touching it. For the storm does not love or hate, it simply is. The Age of Heroes. The world of men had changed. Cities rose where once there had been only scattered villages. Marble temples crowned the hillsides, their columns gleaming in the light of the sun. The air was thick with the sound of hammers on bronze, the clash of shields in the training fields, and the whispers of poets who wove the deeds of men into song. And above it all, the storm watched. From his throne upon Olympus, Zeus looked down upon an age unlike any before it, an age of courage and cruelty, of love and war, where mortals reached higher than they had ever dared. The threads of fate. The Moirae, the three sisters, who spun, measured, and cut the threads of mortal lives, moved with quiet precision. Zeus did not command them, not truly, but their work often bent with the winds of his will. When his gaze fell upon a city, when the whisper of his favor brushed against a mortal's ear, the threads trembled and destinies shifted. It was an age of heroes, but heroes are not born without the hand of gods. The Trojan War. It began, as so many things did, with a choice. At a wedding upon Olympus, the union of Peleus and Thetis, all the gods had gathered, their laughter ringing like music through the high halls. All but one. Eris, the goddess of discord, had been denied an invitation. In her place, she cast a golden apple into the feast, its surface gleaming with a single inscription, "To the fairest." Hera reached for it first, her eyes sharp and claiming. Athena's hand followed, calm but unyielding. And then there was Aphrodite, her beauty like sunlight upon still water, quiet and absolute. The quarrel grew until it burned. And so Zeus, with the careful neutrality of a storm watching from a distance, chose a mortal to decide. Paris, a prince of Troy. Paris chose love. He chose Aphrodite, and with her promise stole away Helen, the queen of Sparta, the woman whose beauty was said to rival the dawn. The world erupted in war.
For 10 years the plains of Troy ran red. Zeus watched as the sons of Greece and Troy clashed beneath the walls of the city. Achilles, bright and furious, his rage a thing no mortal could contain. Hector, steady and unflinching, fighting not for glory, but for the love of his city and family. Odysseus, ever cunning, his mind sharp as the blade he carried. The gods moved among them, their hands guiding spears, their whispers twisting fates. Hera stood with the Greeks, her fury still sharp over the apple denied her. Athena moved through the camps, lending wisdom where she pleased, and Aphrodite, soft and relentless, shielded Paris with her love, no matter how deep the battlefield drowned in blood. And above them Zeus remained distant, the storm silent. For the war was not his to win or lose. It was balance, written in the threads of fate, and even the king of the gods could not cut what had been woven.
When Troy finally burned, its towers collapsing in waves of flame and shadow, the cries of the city reached Olympus. The air smelled of smoke and salt, and the grief of those who had fought, not for gold or glory, but for love and the fragile hope of peace. From the ruins rose heroes and ghosts, men who would carry the weight of that war for the rest of their days. And in the quiet aftermath, the storm rolled on. For the war was not his to win or lose. It was balance, written in the threads of fate, and even the king of the gods could not cut what had been woven. When Troy finally burned, its towers collapsing in waves of flame and shadow, the cries of the city reached Olympus. The air smelled of smoke and salt, and the grief of those who had fought, not for gold or glory, but for love and the fragile hope of peace. From the ruins rose heroes and ghosts, men who would carry the weight of that war for the rest of their days. And in the quiet aftermath, the storm rolled on. Odysseus and the long journey home. Among those who sailed from Troy was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, whose cunning had turned the tide of war with the wooden horse that breached the city's walls. But the sea, restless and untamed, had other plans. Poseidon, angered by an insult, churned the waters, scattering Odysseus's fleet and casting him adrift upon endless tides. For years he wandered, from the halls of Circe to the depths of the underworld, his name whispered like a prayer by his wife Penelope as she wove and unwove her loom. Through it all, Zeus watched, the thunder quiet but present. Some said it was pity that finally carried Odysseus home, his ship battered but whole, his heart heavy with the ghosts of those he had lost. Others said it was balance, the thread cut only when it was meant to be.
Prometheus and the fire. Even as heroes rose and fell, the old stories did not fade. On a mountain far from the cities, chained to the cold rock, Prometheus endured. The Titan who had given fire to man still bore his punishment, the eagle descending each day to tear at his flesh, only for the wound to knit itself anew by nightfall. Zeus had not forgotten the defiance, nor the gift that had brought light and destruction to the mortal world. Yet in quiet moments, when the storm was still, some said the king of the gods turned his gaze to that lonely peak and softened, if only slightly. For Prometheus's crime had not been malice, but love, a love that even lightning could not fully scorch away. The age of heroes was an age of noise, of drums and war cries, of hymns rising from temples, of poets singing the names of men who would be remembered long after their bones had turned to dust. But it was also an age of balance. For every hero raised high, another fell. For every victory, there was loss. The storm above remained, unchanging, eternal, neither blessing nor curse, only the quiet certainty that everything born of the earth would one day return to it. And through it all, Zeus reigned. The rise of worship. As the noise of war faded into memory, a quieter sound began to rise, the sound of prayers. From the rocky hills of Athens to the fertile valleys of Olympia, mortals raised their voices to the sky. They built altars of stone and fire, offering wine, honey, and the blood of bulls to the king of the gods. The air grew thick with the scent of burnt offerings, curling like smoke into the heavens. Zeus was no longer just the storm that broke upon the mountains or the distant figure in the clouds. He became lawgiver, protector of oaths, keeper of balance.
The Oracle at Dodona.
In the forests of Epirus, where the oaks whispered with the voice of the wind, the oracle of Dodona spoke his will. Priests and priestesses listened to the rustle of leaves, to the soft groan of ancient branches, and translated the language of the god. Kings came seeking counsel before wars, farmers seeking blessings for rain, lovers seeking answers to questions only they dared to ask in secret. The oak did not always answer clearly, but then neither did the storm. The Games of Olympia. On the wide plains of Elis, a sacred truce was declared. Every 4 years, men from across the Greek world gathered not for battle, but for competition. They ran, wrestled, and threw the discus under the blazing sun, their bodies honed for strength and speed. These were the Olympic Games, a gift to honor Zeus, to celebrate not the destruction of war, but the triumph of human excellence. Victors carried home olive wreaths, their names carved into stone, their glory sung by poets. And above the track, the great altar smoked, the flames licking high toward Olympus, a promise of devotion and respect. Temples and thunder. Stone by stone, the earth reshaped itself in his name. At Olympia, a temple rose, a marvel of white marble and sculpted columns, crowned by the towering statue of Zeus crafted by Phidias, its eyes and gold gleaming in the torchlight. Its eyes, carved with quiet power, seemed to follow the worshippers as they knelt at his feet. In Athens, Zeus Eleutherios was honored as the god of freedom, protector of those who fought against tyranny. In distant Sicily and Asia Minor, travelers built smaller shrines where storms had once split the sky, offerings left for safe passage and good harvests. Everywhere the god was present. In the crack of thunder, in the stillness before the rain, in the judgment of kings, and the oath of a soldier before battle.
Zeus and the law. With worship came expectation. Mortals began to see Zeus not only as the wielder of lightning, but as the guardian of order. He was Zeus Xenios, protector of guests and wanderers, punishing those who broke the sacred code of hospitality. He was Zeus Horkios, avenger of false oaths, his wrath swift against liars and oath breakers. In every city, in every home, there was an unspoken rule: respect the storm, and the storm will spare you. The edge of mortality. Yet for all their prayers, mortals were never allowed to forget the truth. Zeus gave gifts freely: rain for the fields, victory in war, a child born strong and healthy. But he could also take without warning: a lightning bolt upon a clear day, a sudden famine, a plague that swept through the streets like a shadow. The poets called it Nemesis, the balance of divine justice, and warned that no man, no matter how great, could escape the gaze of Olympus forever. The age of heroes meets history. As centuries passed, the stories of Zeus, once carried by wandering poets and told around crackling fires, began to take root in the very soil of Greece. Myth became memory, and memory became history.
The temples of power. Across the Greek world, cities rose like marble blossoms, Their foundations were stone, but their walls were built upon belief. At Olympia, the sacred sanctuary of Zeus grew into one of the most magnificent complexes of the ancient world. Archaeologists today still uncover its bones, the remnants of altars blackened with ancient ash, fragments of carved reliefs that once depicted his battles with the Titans, and the foundations of the massive Temple of Zeus, completed around 457 BCE. Inside stood a 12-meter-tall chryselephantine statue, a masterpiece by the sculptor Phidias. Crafted from ivory and gold, Zeus sat upon a grand throne inlaid with ebony and precious stones, holding in one hand a figure of Nike, the goddess of victory, and in the other a scepter crowned by an eagle. Ancient travelers swore that if Zeus rose from his throne, the roof of the temple would not be able to contain him. This statue would later be counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Olympia, Games of the Gods. The first recorded Olympic Games took place in 776 BCE, though their origins stretched much deeper into the mists of time. Every 4 years, during the hottest month of summer, a sacred truce called the Echecheria was declared. Wars ceased, roads cleared, and travelers streamed toward Olympia. Athletes, priests, merchants, poets, and kings. The air shimmered with heat as men competed in running, wrestling, javelin, and the brutal pancration, a no-rules contest of strength and strategy. Victors did not win gold or wealth, but glory, their names etched into history, their wreaths of olive leaves offered at the altar of Zeus. To the ancients, the games were not mere sport. They were ritual, a living prayer to the king of the gods, a celebration of arete, excellence in body and spirit.
The oracle's voice. Far to the northwest, in the ancient oak grove of Dodona, the voice of Zeus whispered through the leaves. Long before the oracle of Delphi gained fame, pilgrims journeyed to Dodona to seek guidance. They stood in silence as the priests and priestesses interpreted the rustle of the sacred oaks, the flight of birds, and the subtle hum of the wind. Rulers came seeking divine approval for new laws or wars. Farmers asked when to plant their seeds. Lovers whispered questions about faith and fidelity. And always, the answers were given in riddles, clear enough to guide, but never enough to chain. To this day, archaeologists have unearthed thin lead tablets at Dodona, etched in ancient questions in faint, careful script. Will my wife bear a son? Should I invest in a voyage across the sea? Have the gods forgiven me? Zeus in the polis. As Greek city-states, the polii, grew in power and complexity, Zeus evolved with them. In Athens, he became Zeus Eleutherios, the protector of liberty, honored after the expulsion of the Persian invaders. In Sparta, Zeus was revered as Zeus Lycaos, a primal wolf god tied to ancient rites and shadowed sacrifices on Mount Lycaon. In Crete, myths persisted of a cave where the infant god had once been hidden, and locals continued their offerings to the mountain spirits. Religion and politics intertwined. To honor Zeus was to legitimize kings, to sanctify treaties, and to remind rulers that power, like lightning, could strike swiftly and without mercy.
The written word. By the 8th century BCE,
The oral songs of poets like Homer and Hesiod began to crystallize into written form. In Hesiod's The Theogony, Zeus emerged not only as a warrior, but as the ultimate arbiter of cosmos, the order that kept chaos at bay. These texts did more than preserve stories. They codified belief, shaping a shared mythology that bound the scattered Greek world together. Through verses etched on papyrus and sung in marketplaces, Zeus became both immortal myth and historical presence, a god not just of storms and skies, but of law, order, and destiny. The reach of Olympus. As trade routes expanded and Greek colonies spread across the Mediterranean, from Ionia to Magna Graecia in southern Italy, so too did the worship of Zeus. Temples rose on distant shores, adapted by local cultures. In Sicily, Zeus was merged with storm gods of older traditions. In Egypt, under the Ptolemies, he blended with Amun to become Zeus Ammon, his likeness crowned with curling ram's horns. Everywhere his image changed, but the core remained the same: the storm, the balance, the unseen hand that turned the wheel of fate. The waning thunder. The centuries turned, as they always do. The temples still stood, their marble steps worn smooth by countless worshippers. The altars still smoked, the statues still gleamed in the torchlight. The poets still sang of lightning and law, of heroes and the quiet voice of justice carried on the wind. But in the crowded streets of Athens, something new was stirring.
The philosophers. They called it logos, reason. In the shaded courtyards of the Agora, men like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle began to ask questions that no prayer could answer. Is the storm a god, they wondered, or is it nature obeying laws unseen? What is justice, if not a principle deeper than Olympus? The gods were still honored. Offerings of wine and olive oil still spilled across polished altars, but the questions had changed. Mortals began to look inward, to seek divinity not in the crack of thunder, but in the quiet order of the universe. And yet, even as reason bloomed, no one truly forgot. When storms shattered the summer sky, when lightning split the earth, people still whispered the same name: Zeus. The shadow of Rome. By the 2nd century BCE, the Greek world trembled under the iron march of Rome. The legions came like an unstoppable tide, their banners casting long shadows across the Aegean. Cities fell, alliances broke, and temples that had stood for centuries now served new masters. But Rome did not erase the gods. It absorbed them. Zeus became Jupiter, the high god of Rome, not diminished, but transformed. His lightning was carried over the Alps, across the Rhine, and deep into the heart of Britannia. The Capitoline Hill in Rome became the new Olympus, and the voice of the sky god echoed in the roar of the Roman Senate, in the triumphs of generals, and in the prayers of soldiers on distant frontiers.
The philosophers of Rome. Under the weight of empire, thinkers like Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius reimagined the divine. They spoke of a single universal order, of a rational fire that bound the cosmos together. Zeus, now Jupiter, was less a man in the clouds and more the quiet, inevitable force of destiny. The Logos, the reason that guided both mortals and immortals alike. The shrinking temples.
By the dawn of the 1st century CE, the world was shifting again. The ancient oracles grew silent. At Dodona, the sacred oaks stood but no longer whispered. At Olympia, the games continued, but their sacred roots began to wither, their meaning lost in the noise of politics and spectacle. The thunder still rolled, but fewer heads turned toward the mountains. The last prayers. Still, in remote villages, in quiet valleys and wind-swept islands, the old ways endured. Farmers still poured wine into the soil for rain. Sailors still traced the sign of lightning over their hearts before venturing into the wine-dark sea. Children still learned the old stories of Cronus, of Hera, of the storm god who ruled the skies. Because, deep down, mortals knew a truth older than reason, older than empire. The storm never truly leaves.